Welcome to Interesting People. My name is Tom Lorentzen. I'm the host of this show, and it's filmed under the auspices of the Chabot Las Positas Community College District here in Hayward, California. The premise of this show is that there are interesting people everywhere in everybody's family, neighborhood, and community. And today I have a very interesting guest on the show, and we're going to talk about several important subjects to current affairs in the United States and the world, and particularly the subject of drones, which is very topical in terms of their development and evolution. My guest today is Mr. Nigel Sutton. Mr. Sutton is a native of Jamaica in the West Indies, and he earned a BS degree in computer science and 3 master's degrees in aeronautical engineering, aviation systems, and business administration. He is also a graduate of the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School and was an astronaut candidate finalist in 1995. He served for 23 years in the United States military, serving in both the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force. He held the rank of commander and served in various command and staff positions in the naval aviation and procurement fields. He is also an active member of several foreign policy and national security programs, and has studied and is conversational in both Russian and Chinese languages. He is presently serving as the Vice President of UAS International Business for AeroVironment, Inc. And in this capacity, he is responsible for overseeing activities for international business and operations. And prior to serving in this position, he was the Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa and the Director of International Operations for Raytheon. Welcome to the show, Nigel.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you inviting me on.
Well, thank you for being on here. The focus of this conversation today, in addition to Nigel and his fascinating career, is going to be on 2 primary subjects, and that's the subjects of drones, or UAVs, and also at the end we're going to talk some about his views and his experience in terms of geopolitics on the international and regional stage in the world. To start off a little bit, let's talk a little bit about yourself, Nigel. You're from Jamaica.
Yes, indeed.
Tell us a little bit about growing up in Jamaica and how that launched you on the rest of things here.
Well, again, thank you, Tom, for bringing me on. Well, interesting background in Jamaica. My father, an American, my mom, Jamaican. Grew up in basically a predominant, English sort of, British society. Went to school. Graduated high school, and then thought about joining the military. Had that view through influence of my father to join the military. And it was a fun time living there, different, obviously, in a school system. But I wanted to join the military, and so I enlisted in the Air Force in 1983. So
you started in the Air Force. How many years did you serve in the Air Force?
4 years. 4 years Air Force. Went to the rank of sergeant. And then, of course, I clearly wanted to fly, and believe it or not, tried to become an Air Force, in flying in the Air Force as a pilot. And that didn't really work out because of Graham Rudman bill, if you remember, in '87, sure. A lot of cutbacks. And so luck would have it, the Navy wanted me, and I joined the Navy.
So you went to the Navy to become a pilot?
Yeah, to fly in the Navy, and then to be an aviator, and became a flight officer, and then fly for the Navy, yes.
What type of planes did you fly?
Well, I originally started in E-2s, and then went to test pilot, as you say, went to test pilot school. So I had numerous aircraft I've flown, Hornets, and then I eventually F-18s, and then went into the Naviair programs for F-18s, and then also engineering for all training aircraft for the Navy.
Wow.
Yep.
So then after 23 years in the military, then you transferred out into the business world. Did you go to Raytheon to begin with?
Yes, I did go straight from the Navy. I retired in '05 and then went into Raytheon. Started off as just a business manager in the Patuxent area, mostly for, near the test center, and then moved up to Washington to serve in the previous role as international operations for Raytheon International, actually.
Sure. One of the things we're going to talk about here is use the term drones, and what I'd like to start off is getting some clarity and definition of what is a drone. Is it the right term, not the right term? What is the proper terminology for this whole subject?
Well, Well, the term drone is really used loosely. In really people look at what I consider unmanned air vehicles or unmanned air systems, and they say those are drones. And there's a big difference. It's really a drone is a sort of a unmanned vehicle, unmanned air vehicle in this case, that is flown autonomous. It's no human input per se with it. While our current UAVs that you see, that's predominantly what you see in the news and what people are using right now, both commercial and for military, is unmanned air vehicles, which are actually there's a man in the loop that is flying or controlling those systems.
So the correct term for most of what we're probably going to discuss then is UAV as
UAVs.
opposed to drone.
Correct.
How did we end up, the drone word is used all the time. How come we don't get the term correct on this?
I don't know. I think it's just an easy way of saying it. Unmanned air vehicles or UAVs is sort of a mouthful in a way. So I think, and part of it's the media too. The media's latch on to that term, and so I think it's that's how it started. How it's being loosely used as a term for UAVs out there.
So a drone is autonomous. It operates on its own intelligence, in essence?
Well, in that case, yes. Definitely, the way I like to say that is it's there's no man in the loop per se with that, or person in the loop with that.
Okay.
Yep.
So the term UAV for unmanned aeronautical vehicle, is that the correct?
Well, yes, by unmanned air vehicles is where I would look at it.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, henceforth, when we're having the discussion, I'm going to refer to UAVs then, being that's the more correct term for most of what we're going to be discussing about. So I'll try and not use the word drone and use UAV so our audience knows what I'm referring to. We talk about UAVs. And where did the whole beginning of this go historically in terms of the idea of developing UAVs then? When did it begin?
Well, actually, history has it, first indications that, balloons, you could say even balloons were used as unmanned air vehicles at one point.
Okay.
A lot of that was used way back into the mid 19th century. But really, what started off, I think, in when it comes to the historical basis of unmanned air vehicles, or UAVs, started really in World War I, and then something that started off really as radio-controlled, remotely controlled air systems or air vehicles were used for mostly reconnaissance, seeing the battlefield, given a general picture back to the ground forces. But most of this was remote-controlled kind of aircraft. It was not the way that we look at UAVs right now. Over the decades, the current World War II, it got more developed, and then we got into in the 50s and 60s where we had sort of simulated, remote-controlled systems to simulate missiles that would help, ships, and especially for the Navy, to track incoming missiles or simulate missiles. But it really didn't take off. UAVs as we know it didn't really take off, really got used for defense security until really in Desert Storm in the 80s, late 80s, or early 90s, where they were used for, clearly for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions.
So during the first war, the Great War, so to speak, World War
Yes.
I, which we're just 100th anniversary starting last year, and our involvement in 1970. Was the first development of these done, were they done in Europe or by the United States? Or
Mostly United States, and in obviously in World War World War I, by Allied forces. But actually, to be honest with you, both sides were using this sort of technology.
So with UAVs then, there's a person involved with these that has de facto control over what they do then.
Correct.
So going back when I was a kid and you had the model airplanes that you could use a remote control, in a way that was sort of a UAV
Sort of
in a
UAV,
way?
yes, in a way. That's what I meant by radio-controlled or remote-controlled vehicles.
Yeah.
Air vehicles.
So, and like when missiles were developed for military purposes, they were launched technologically, but once they're launched, then there's no human really in control of them after that, with some exception, or?
Well, if I think I know what you're asking is with UAVs or with
I'm thinking more on the missile technology as they were developed, in post-World War II era.
Right.
But because it always struck me that once a missile was launched, you couldn't call it back, or could you call it back?
Well, no, that's true. Once a missile is launched, you really can't call it back per se. But you remember, there's guidance to those missiles. It depends what type of missile. There's, in a radio frequency domain or in the EOIR domain, electrical, optical, infrared domain. But no, usually once you fire a missile, you probably can't bring it back. You probably won't be able to bring it back.
Yeah. So UAVs, as they have come into play now, they're becoming very common in this country as well as around the world. And I know you travel extensively, virtually around the world in this area in your business capacity. So one of the reasons why I asked Nigel to come on is I think he has a unique insight and views that he's developed about the spread of this technology, the use of the technology, but also into geopolitical affairs and dealing with entities, corporations, and governments around the world. Is the United States then the premier developer of UAV technology and the use of UAVs?
Yes, we are definitely the world's leader right now. Obviously, there's other countries that are developing their indigenous UAVs also, but we are definitely the leaders in unmanned air vehicle technology.
Are we? Do you think we're light years ahead of other nations? There's capabilities, or are other nations catching up with us then?
We were, but I think other nations now are catching up to the U.S. Level of technology. Yes.
With the whole technological revolution that's dominating world affairs, and as it developed, and I can remember talking to my grandfather and grandmother. They were old enough to remember the Wright brothers and the rise of this, and then my dad. I remember him even referencing he was a kid in World War I with about General Billy Mitchell and talking about the issues he ran into, talking about the development of the need to develop an air force and air capabilities. And it seems like it's a matter-of-fact thing now, but it's still relatively new, basically the last 100 years in terms of aerial technologies. Is this a natural form of modernization, shall I say, militarily, intelligence-wise, economically? Is this just the next stage of evolution?
I believe it is. A lot of current status quo such as the Navy and the Air Force, and was never really took on UAVs as part of a capability that they always looked at it as a supplement to their forces. But now you're seeing UAVs being used more and more for missions that were not considered to be able to be conducted by UAVs, and you'll see that happening predominantly now. In the future, yes, I believe UAVs and unmanned systems, by the way, not just unmanned air, will be a bigger part of our lives, a bigger part of both commercial and in defense.
We're going to be moving into that subject here now as we transition into really that type of technology relevant to intelligence matters, intelligence gathering, applications in the intelligence and the military work primarily. Then later on here in our discussion, we'll go into the economics and the domestic uses. So I want to stay particularly on the military and intelligence side. How is, when you said it was first being used going back to when did we start using UAVs in some manner in the intelligence world? Because I remember Gary Powers being shot down with the U-2, and did this come out of that type of
I think in the 60s, after the Gary Powers incident, that due to certain sort of scenarios where you wanted to have the less of a threat to the human, the person, the pilot, UAVs became more critical. And so I would say, I don't know the specific year, but I would say in the mid-60s, early 70s, where UAVs started to play a bigger role for that reason. Yep.
I know with satellites, I'm old enough to remember when Sputnik went up in October of 1957, I think it was. I was in the 5th grade, I believe. And then as we got our first satellite, and how satellite technology then started driving things as we found all types of commercial applications other than military, of course, military purposes too. and then with UAVs too. So as these tremendous technological steps forward, it seems like the old form of intelligence gathering and of military actions are becoming just increasingly technological and high tech. What have you seen just in your own lifetime with your career in the military? And
Yes, it's in case of UAVs, yes. Intelligence, especially in the signals intelligence and the communications intelligence, UAVs have played a bigger role. And actually, I would say a majority, other than what I say non-lethal, they have played a bigger role in the sense of longer endurance sort of systems, higher altitude, and more sophisticated payloads to collect that sort of information.
now they were used, you said, in Desert Storm, 1991.
Yep.
And were we finding then that these were pretty effective and efficient to be gathering?
I mean, based on the reports that I've seen and what I've read, yes. Clearly, there's nothing out there in the public domain to say
Sure.
how effective they were. I mean, per se, in that time era. But yeah, I'm based on what I've read that they did pretty well.
As technology has changed the nature of military activities in particular, we obviously tragically lose individuals in the military when we have a military action like in Afghanistan and Iraq. But it appears to be pretty clear we're just using technology so much more, and in so doing, reducing the risk of loss of life and harm to people physically. So it seems like the whole nature of warfare has become maybe more efficient in doing less harm to humans, but being more effective in terms of trying to impact a situation. Is that a fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment. As technology in the unmanned air vehicle domain, as technologies get better, one, it is providing safety for putting, in a way, not putting our pilots into harm's way. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, too, what people, I think, don't also, forget about is also that the technology is allowing, and especially in the lethal domain, to get more accuracy in where they place ordnance and so on, where it lessens collateral damage. And also on the intelligence side, to get quicker, faster, and more accurate information at very far distances. Mm-hmm. So.
Because where we have the satellites out there which can zero down through technology quite accurately down, and then the drones, UAVs are at a lower level even, so they have similar capacities then to be zeroing in on a particular location, maybe even an individual house or a facility building, and even humans that are walking and what's transpiring then.
That is correct. But you remember now, satellites can't be readily moved immediately to that position. So when you look at UAVs, they're really what I call more flexible to be responding to security needs, surveillance needs, much faster than how you deploy a satellite, to move a satellite to be able to see the same, the same picture.
I see. What we're going to do now, Nigel, we're going to take a brief pause here, and then we're going to do a public service announcement, and then we're going to come back and carry on with this conversation at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who doesn't want a shiny new electronic device? Sure, back home there's a garage or a basement full of old electronics that we don't talk about. But old electronics aren't garbage, and they're not useless. They're full of parts and materials that can be recycled into new electronics or donated to some wonderful causes. That flip phone and old computer can still live on. Recycling electronics is the green thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and it's so easy. Log on to greenergadgets.org and enter your zip code to find the recycling center nearest you.
Welcome back to Interesting People, and my guest today is Mr. Nigel Sutton. Nigel, when we were talking earlier, we were talking about the development and evolution of UAV, unmanned aeronautical vehicles, as I try and get the term correct, commonly referred to drones, and their development and their evolution and use militarily in the intelligence world as well. At the present time, they're being used rather extensively for actions in under President Obama in Pakistan and Afghanistan and other places there. The president gave a recent talk at the National Defense Institute.
University, I believe. I think NDU, National Defense University.
National Defense University, where he outlined his approach and his policies on this, and he emphasizes, from what I read, strongly that there was, in a way, almost a moral case for this because of, yes, it does do harm and there is collateral damage, including sometimes to innocent people, but it minimizes the loss compared to other forms of military uses. Can you elaborate a little bit on what the president was explaining in that talk and his approach to the use of these vehicles as you see it? And I want to clarify, too, is that Nigel's my guest as a person.
Right.
He's not speaking on behalf of the company that he's employed with, if you'd like to just clarify that.
Yes, these are my personal opinions, personal comments.
So in terms of the approach that's being taken, I know President Bush used them as the technology is maturing, and now they're even more mature, and now President Obama is utilizing them even more, and probably the next president will use them even more. How do you see this impacting the whole way in which the military performs its duties and we perform our duties, our obligations militarily?
Well, it's certainly the president in a way is right in a sense that as as employment of UAVs in a lethal form, it's reducing collateral damage, and that's the key part of it, and also of course keeping our pilots out of harm's way and so on. But there's always been a discussion on the policy of how using it, and of course, how they determine targets and so on and so on. I'm not going to get into that here.
Sure.
But I think as technology gets better, these things will again be used for precise execution for specific enemies on the ground, in the sense of reducing collateral damage in the process. I think that will continue used that way.
Our adversaries, the enemies, shall I say, of democracy and freedom, particularly in the terrorist world, are they getting access to this equipment too, and are they potentially going to be able to utilize these devices as well?
Well, I certainly hope not. All sorts of equipment, hardware, we don't want obviously get into enemy hands. But to say that will never happen, I say, would be very naive. I think at all costs, the United States tries to limit the opportunities for our enemies to get a hold of this technology. But from history will show us that eventually they will somehow get some sort of this technology to use against us in a way. So yes, of course, there's a danger of that. There's a danger that they can get possession of this, but the U.S. government works very hard for them not to. Mm-hmm. So,
as we're the United States using these devices with greater frequency, and as their effectiveness has become better with each new generation of capabilities, then so it's impacting military thinking and military behavior. U.S. military, is it having similar impact looking down the road for other nations, whether they're part of the NATO alliance or the development of the Chinese military, the Russian military, elsewhere? Are they also looking and saying, well, gee, this is pretty effective. We need to be doing this. Is it caught on pretty much?
Absolutely. You'll see other nations and their militaries are using it. European countries are using a lot of UAVs for short. Yes, all the countries have caught on to how effective the usage of UAVs are. So.
What in terms of the military side then, or the actually non-military, because we're seeing, particularly with where lethal force is being used, but not by governmental entities, but by groups and organizations, particularly out of the Middle East. What, as this path develops, is it possible then that that this is a new form of engagement, a new form of potential use in conflicts and differences, and that may also then end up outside of governmental auspices and control. And what is a sort of a potential worst case scenario that you might see in this type of environment?
When you say worst type, I mean like the proliferation of
Yes.
this sort of technology?
Like with nuclear weapons,
Yeah.
because I know Secretary of State Schultz and former Senator Nunn and others have been involved in, in the United States too, at the end of the Cold War, to reducing the number of nuclear weapons throughout the world and to reduce them, down to hopefully someday where we get where we don't have any. So as the proliferation of UAVs takes place, is there, can these potentially be used then for chemical warfare in a way, and biological warfare?
Yep, they sure can. I mean, as a matter of fact, what's one of the biggest dangers we see, in my opinion, in the future, these systems could be used just beyond just lethal, but, thought sort of for like chemical, sort of threats be used, payloads. Of course, that's not out there right now, but yes, in the future, do I think there's a danger of that happening? Of course.
With the development of radar going back 70, 80 years ago, and radar's ability to detect motion in the air and with airplanes and then missiles, and, can radar detect the size of these devices? I happen to just look on the internet and I see they're can be pretty small and they can be fairly large. What's the size range of these vehicles?
Well, there are all sorts of sizes. I mean, UAVs are all the way from small, what I call micro UAVs, all the way up to what I call large, high altitude, long endurance sort of air vehicles. Yes, there are some UAVs out there that are stealthy in nature, low observability, but most of them can be, except for the micro UAVs. I mean, it depends on certain what type of radar you're using, but predominantly most of them can be caught on radar.
What's the sort of the
or detected by radar? Sorry.
So so most of them cannot be detected.
Can
be detected
I mean,
by radar.
Again, there are some UAVs out there that could be low observable, right? That I don't know about, but yes, the ones that I know about, especially in what I call Tier 2, medium altitude, long endurance, and tactical UAVs, probably can be detected by radar.
What's the distance that these can travel, from sort of the most distance they could travel at one time?
Oh, wow. There's, the endurance on these vehicles of unmanned air vehicles range from thousands and thousands of miles all the way down to, 5 to 10, miles, kilometers. So it's a large range of ranges depending on, again, what air vehicle.
I know that the price will vary depending on sophistication and uses. When I happened to look on the internet and I saw, gee, I can get some of these very, very modest ones for 60, 70, $80, and I thought, really? So what's the price range on these things depending upon the stage of development and maturity?
Well, what you see out there is, yes, there's a tremendous amount of what I call commercial, small UAVs out there that sell from, range from $500 to $1,000 kind of thing. The systems, if you look in our tactical systems, all the way up to, your high altitude, long endurance, medium altitude, long endurance sort of systems, you're talking ranging from, a couple of $100,000 to millions of dollars.
Really?
So yeah, it's again, it depends on which air vehicle, size and make and so on.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I would imagine at our outstanding military universities, West Point, Annapolis, et cetera, at the Air Force Academy, that these type of things now are being incorporated into strategic planning, education. I know there's such great technical education at the military academies. So is this now deeply embedded in our whole rethinking of how we do things strategically in a way?
Yes, it has been, as these are, to answer you straightforward, yes, they are part of the doctrine that's being trained in all our militaries right now, correct? Yep.
Does this potentially, you think that we need less men and women in uniform and more technical people?
Who knows, right? I mean, that's one of the arguments is once we provide more unmanned systems, not just air vehicle, but undersea and so on, that there's a argument out there that you'll need less people. I don't know how to answer that. I think probably there will be a little bit less requirement, but I think we need to be careful to say that for sure. Because sometimes unmanned air vehicles that I know about, UAVs, some of them require sometimes a larger logistic footprint to manage these systems, and so you may need more people. So I'm not sure how to answer that in the sense of will it reduce our folks in the military.
Are there any international protocols that have been developed or being developed through any manner of treaties or anything through the United Nations? What's transpiring out there as nations among nations say, well, what do we do here? How do we address this whole new phenomenon?
Well, just some countries, first of all, go through an airworthiness for their systems, and they also control or put a sort of, not all countries, but regulate the way they fly their unmanned air systems, especially over populated areas. The United States being one of them. The FAA is trying to develop a way of not only to regulate, but for safety and for privacy issue, but mostly for the safety issues, to be able to fly UAVs in our airspace. Same thing with other countries. They're going through the same similar how should I say this, process to see how they can fly their UAVs in their airspaces.
And that's a good segue as we lead into the next portion of this conversation, because we've talked about the military, intelligence, areas of UAVs and like vehicles. Now we're going to focus more on the domestic side, about economics, law enforcement, airline safety, et cetera. So you mentioned the FAA, Federal Aeronautics Administration. So what is the status of current FAA involvement in establishing regulations, guidelines for this?
Well, they've been busy. Well, they just recently came out with some guidelines, and for the first phase, they should be coming out with a report in 2016 that they're saying to show how they will regulate UAVs in United States airspace. As of now, they have some guidance that's given currently that will try, how should I say this, to regulate distance from airports, flying UAVs, altitude of 400 feet, below 400 feet, and some sort of certification for UAV pilots, to people to fly UAVs. So that's kind of happening right now. But as we proceed on, and I think I recall it's 2016, they'll be having a full guidance or regulatory regulation on this.
Well, we're going to take a short pause here for a public service announcement and come back and explore that subject further regarding domestic and economic and civilian uses of UAVs.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Essie Patha-Murkerson, an actor, but I'm also one of nearly 26 million Americans with diabetes.
And I'm Dr. Jeffrey Mechanic from the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists, or ACE.
When I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, I learned the importance of knowing my A1C, which is my average blood sugar level over 2 to 3 months, and I worked with Dr. Mechanic to set my A1C goal.
To help reduce the risk of serious health problems, ACE recommends many people with diabetes have an A1C of 6.5% or less. Nearly half of people with diabetes are not at this goal, and a different A1C may be right for you.
That's why I worked with Dr. Mechanic to create my personal treatment plan, including diet, exercise, and medication to help me meet my A1C goal. Sometimes your doctor may need to change your treatment plan.
I encourage everyone with type 2 diabetes to talk with their doctor to help reach their A1C goal.
Visit bloodsugarbasics.com today.
Welcome back to Interesting People, and to my guest today, Mr. Nigel Sutton. When we took the break, Nigel, we were starting to talk about the Federal Aeronautics Administration, known as FAA. So let's go back to that and discuss where they're at now and the type of regulations they're developing and how they're starting to deal and address with this issue of greater frequency of these vehicles in the air.
Well, Tom, a lot of folks, especially including the hobbyists, are anticipating these regulations. The FAA, primary role is, of course, safety and public safety, and they are currently looking at or in the process of developing regulations of how to fly UAVs in American airspace. Now, currently they have some guidelines, to be able to, authorize certain flight. They issue, based on, if requested, certificate of authorizations in certain areas where you can fly, you're allowed to fly, UAVs. Currently, too, they have guidelines showing, indicating where you can fly and not fly UAVs. Certainly below 400 feet, a certain distance and ranges from airports, and so on. And you can imagine why. You've heard you've seen in newspapers and heard on the news of near midair sort of situations, yes. And so that's clearly that is something that gets the FAA's attention, and they're looking at those things.
I think I saw in the evening news last week that commercial pilots, I think they had said that there were 8 commercial pilots who had reported having experiences with UAVs or observing them in the proximity of where they were, and I assume probably on takeoff or landing, I assume. But,
yes, it was most of the incidents, and I can't remember all of them, but the ones that were significant that I know of were during either landing or taking off from airports.
Because I know there's a chronic problem with geese that has caused different major accidents. I think one in New York, and I think one out here too, when a flock of geese were sucked into a jet engine, therefore disabling it. So is that the type of thing that's of concern too?
Similar situation, right? So the key thing too is with bird, with the incidents with birds. Usually at airports they have what you call alerts. They'll alert of flocks of birds going by the approach end or departure of the airports. Problem with UAVs is you could have a hobbyist flying a UAV. Let's say they weren't following the rules and flying a mile away, which is what happened in these particular cases. Right there by the airport, proximity to the airport. There's no way they can determine if that's determine that movement of that UAV. So that's why it becomes a little bit more trickier when it comes to that situation.
So as of the moment, it's really in the hands of the FAA and Congress, I guess, to establish guidelines and regulations. Yeah. So there probably is going to have to be congressional action on this matter as well.
My guess is yes. I believe it will be in the tail end of 2016 is when this regulation, FAA regulatory and guidance will be issued out.
What about state and local governments who are on the federal side? Do state and local governments, are they doing things in this area in terms of their own guidelines and regulations that you know of?
Not that I know of. I mean, this is definitely at the FAA federal level where the action is right now. Other than some states, across the country right now, there's some states that have been allowed or given certificate of authorizations to be able to fly UAVs in those areas, and at that point, that's where the state will probably monitor those activities. But most of this is at FAA level.
So it's certificate of authorization
or
to
cause.
use.
They'll say cause.
Oh, okay, to use a UAV. So that's an existing requirement.
That is an existing requirement.
Now, when I looked at the internet and I saw that there were again vehicles that could be purchased for $75 or $100, if I were to do something like that, would I need to get that certificate of authorization to use the device as a toy, even, or?
Well, the guidance the FAA is given is to fly below 400 feet, certain proximity from airports, and also you can't use it for commercial purposes too. Yes.
So if the intent is to use it at a higher altitude than 400 feet, or in proximity airport, or for commercial purposes, then you have to get this certificate of authorization. Correct. Or restrictions on engage. But if your intent is not to do that, then you can utilize one of these.
Right. Exactly.
Vehicles. Huh. Interesting. How many? Any estimate? Are there thousands of these engaged around the country and the world, or tens of thousands?
I have no idea. Probably tens of thousands. Because they're predominantly. Again, hobbyists use this a lot. Hobbyists. Yeah. Like you said earlier, you can buy one for out of the store, $500,000. You can have a small little UAV.
Uh-huh.
So,
is there concern that you know of in Congress or in the executive branch from the White House over moving more quickly to develop regulations and guidelines? Do you have any sense on that?
Yes, there is a sense of urgency of this. You know, the latest is you saw a UAV crash into the around the compound of the White House. So clearly that's gotten visibility.
Government worker crashes drone into White House lawn. The Secret Service is investigating a small drone that crashed into the White House lawn early Monday morning. At 3:08 a.m., a White House staffer observed a small device flying low and approaching the southeast side of the White House lawn. The drone has since been described as a quadcopter measuring about 2 feet in diameter with 4 propellers. The device, which is commercially available, crashed into a tree near the White House's East Garden. Around 5 a.m., Secret Service members could be seen combing the White House lawn for additional objects. The White House was also placed on lockdown as a precautionary measure.
But yeah, I sense that Congress is looking at this and administration to get this as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. I remember on that incident, I think it was a federal employee that did that.
I think it was, yes. Yeah, I think it was,
So
yes.
what was he thinking or whatever? But another area where these have become quite interesting, shall I say, in terms of use is in the area of law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And we're in California here in Alameda County. I know there have been discussions about and debates about the pros and cons of having the county sheriff's office having these capabilities. How do you view this overall debate and what they bring to the table or what they may not bring to the table in terms of use by law enforcement? Are you finding a strong interest from law enforcement agencies in the country? And
yes, and you know what I find is a lot of our international, on the international side, law enforcement agencies wanting this capability. But yes, in the United States, law enforcement clearly for urban sort of scenarios that they would would like to use have that capability of UAVs, especially tactical or the small UAV side.
Well, I know driving on the highways in California, Nevada, and elsewhere, and on the open road, and sometimes you go a little bit faster than you should, and periodically there'll be a sign there saying highway manned by aircraft.
Yep.
But only once have I ever seen an aircraft up there doing anything, so I think it's certainly more of a psychological deterrent to say it's up there. But I would see with highway patrol in particular on highways not only in rural areas but in suburban and even in urban areas with the traffic congestion that exists and accidents occur, they have great potential, I would think, for good in these areas.
Absolutely. They, especially in urban sort of scenarios, yes, this will enhance law enforcement surveillance, and actually sometimes probably where you have right now they use helicopters, helos to track fugitives or folks of interest and so on. Well, those things are sort of expensive too, and also you have a person in the loop. Safeties of concern, flying helos. Even Hollywood is thinking about using UAVs for that same reason. So this does enhance law enforcement in that respect. Also, like you said, it also force border sort of surveillance.
Yes.
You can see where that will also enhance that that sort of
Are they
mission.
presently being used by Border Patrol UAVs to view the security on our borders? I assume.
I would assume, but I rather
Sure, I
not
understand.
say something about that. Yeah.
Yeah. With forest fires too, I know I've got friends that work in that area to deal with forest fires, and I can see the potential value of the ability to see which way a fire is moving, where the wind's going, so that they could have, I would think, significant value there to protect life and to get a sense of forest fires.
And those are, and actually some UAVs have been employed for that. Forest fires out in the west, in close to the area, close to here actually, and also for search and rescue.
Yes.
They've also been used in real world. They've used for search and rescue. So
here in California, I know with some of our coast areas, periodically somebody will go too far off to the side of a cliff doing some climbing or something, and they get stranded there and they can't get off. and often you have to, you get the search and rescue, the fire department there, a helicopter and stuff. So it seems like, and sometimes, to get a position and get a read of the terrain where the person is, it would seem like these UAVs could go in and see precisely where there's a potential avenue or path to get to a person and get that person out safely. And so search and rescue, fire, law enforcement, it seems like this may be, in a way, the most positive area maybe of this.
Oh, absolutely. This is where I think you could get what I consider the best upside in UAVs. Clearly, it reduces, it increased safety, and also I think it's more efficient if you really think about it. To be able to first of all fly at lower altitudes, closer in proximity to the person, or at the same time fly higher to get what I call a wide field of view search of the area to find someone. So.
It's been topical in recent months talking about whether it's Amazon or pizza delivery getting into delivering using UAVs to deliver packages and things like that. What potential resides in that area? How do you see that world evolving?
That's a good question. As you know, Jeff Bezos with Amazon, I think it will eventually happen. I don't think it will happen in the timelines that folks are saying. But yes, I think the UAVs being used for that will happen eventually. Yes.
One of the most, would my library eventually be able to, if I want to order a book, instead of that, maybe they can send a little UAV and drop it off at my house and make it more convenient. I don't know if it'll ever go that far, but maybe.
It may. I mean, that takes a great deal of sophistication of technology for that to happen. But eventually, I think. I mean, now there's timelines out there that this will be within a year and so on. I don't agree with that. I think it's going to take a lot longer because what you're asking is very sophisticated. But yes, eventually that will happen.
But Nigel, probably the most sensitive area in this whole subject is the issue of privacy.
Right.
And the use of these vehicles to invade privacy, whether through governmental or non-governmental uses. And the whole privacy issue, and I grew up, like a lot of people, reading Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, H.G. Wells, Isaac Asimov. So that brave new world, in a way, seems like it's with us now with the tremendous advancements in technology. But privacy seems to be, in my conversation with people, the greatest area of concern, that we're just, with the internet and everything, that we've lost privacy. So how do you view UAV world in terms of that whole subject area? Because that seems to be the area that people are most concerned about.
And that is correct. That is the biggest concern that I know of with UAVs. And so this is the double-edged sword, right? So we just talked about how it enhances a lot of our missions, whether it's law enforcement, domestic, or defense, and so on. But here's where it's sort of a double-edged sword. Here's where now we're encroaching into how far do you use, and with the proliferation of UAVs, how can we control them in a way that we keep our privacy, keep a certain level of privacy, and that's a tough question. That I don't know. I don't think we have an answer for that yet. But yes, that is I think the primary concern, the biggest concern with UAVs.
Yes. We're going to take a pause here again for a public service announcement and come back for the last segment of this conversation with Mr. Nigel Sutton.
It started out like a totally normal day.
I love you.
I mean, I guess I was a little sweaty and I was definitely sore. I thought I had gas. Turns out I was having a heart attack. Heart disease is the #1 killer of American women. So now I take care of my heart and I tell the women in my life to do the same.
Sounds great, by the way.
That's nice, sweetie, but that's not my heart. That is. Find out more from the American Heart Association at goredforwomen.org.
Welcome back to Interesting People. My name's Tom Lorentzen, and I'm the host of the program. And we're now going to move into the fourth and final segment of this hour-long conversation with my guest, Mr. Nigel Sutton. Nigel, we've talked about UAVs, the popular term drones. We've talked about their military and intelligence uses, commercial possibilities, the issue of privacy. And so we've sort of exhausted that subject. We're going to move into the final 10 or 15 minutes here to talk about a different area, and that is some of the views that you have and observations you have on geopolitical affairs. We're obviously in a rapidly changing environment. It's been said that the most important thing to understand is in the 21st century we're in, as well as the 20th century, is the acceleration of change, unprecedented in human history. When the Cold War came to an end, it ended 75 years from the inception of World War I through World War II, through the Cold War, and that period of time came to an end. Then it seemed like we had a pause for maybe 10 years, relative stability. Francis Fukuyama, the great writer, projected that there maybe was a consensus emerged where at sort of the end of history we're moving into a democratic world. And then 9/11 happened and the whole thing changed, it seemed like. So we're in a new era, a new realm of international affairs. We don't have a name for it. What do you see as the new world we're into post-Cold War, post-9/11, and now we're into this world where terrorism is a concern and there's instability in various key parts of the world? And just, do you have any overall view about what's happening on a global basis?
Well, I mean, during the Cold War, I mean, we knew there was a sort of a view of the world when it was in the Cold War. Cold War, you had the Soviet Union at the time versus the United States. It was clear what strategy that was put forth during those times. As you stated, Cold War, went away. Of course, we had 9/11, and I see a world now where the old global order that we're used to is being challenged by a transnational sort of entities out there that are changing the way in that the global order that we know of is viewed at. It's changed, if that makes sense.
I know former President George H.W. Bush talked about when the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War came to an end, is that we were building a new world order, but yet no term was ever applied, and then we went through 10 years, and then terrorism rose to the forefront of international issues, and instability and uncertainty. There's players that are not nation-state oriented. They're outside of the nation-state system. And there's one of the areas where I know you've traveled extensively and stuff, the whole Middle East question. There's always been strong concerns that the Middle East could implode at some point. And how do you see the Middle East in general now in terms of its stability, instability, and the direction of things?
Well, what I see right now is a lot of upheaval in the Middle East and North Africa. Even tribes versus tribal sort of warfare, and of course there's always that Sunni Shia proxy sectarian sort of fight going on too. So yeah, it's and of course the beacon, the one that is trying to manage a lot of this is of course Saudi Arabia. In the middle of all of this, trying to manage a lot of how the Middle East is being upheaval in the Middle East.
The Economist recently did a feature story upon technology, and I think also struggling to try and come up with a term for the period of time we've entered into, and it seems like it's maybe the period of technology, I don't know, in terms of impacting nation-state behavior, corporate behavior, business behavior, social behavior, the whole social media phenomenon with the Facebook, et cetera, and Twitter, et cetera. And with this, and in The Economist, they said that there are an estimated 2 billion people in the world now using smartphones, and that within 5 years, that'll be up to more like 4 billion. And the majority of the adults in the world would be having a smartphone, whether in the United States, Europe, Asia, South America, Latin America, Africa. So technology seems to be changing everything. So in less developed countries with technology, here we're talking about UOVs, smartphones, is technology the driving force in impacting instability in the world, uncertainty in the world, good and bad?
Well, it's certainly having an impact on people's lives all over the world. I mean, certainly the answers, people can get the answer much quicker on the sort of technology we have out there right now. Also, it enhances also economies in the sense of, once you have, if people have more knowledge of what's happening around them, clearly it will improve in commerce and a knowledge-based sort of economy. But there's also downsides to this too, and so it's a mixed blessing.
I know you speak some Russian, and
I do.
It's a very issue of serious concern in terms of Mr. Putin, Russia, the Ukraine, the instability in Eastern Europe, and intentions. Any general observations on what's transpiring relevant to that part of the world?
I think everyone's focused on the Middle East right now, a lot of the issues there. But this is one, especially with the Ukraine issue, that I think we need to really pay attention to. Clearly, it's been in the news and so on. But I think that Europe is going to see a lot more of this activity in Ukraine, and this is clearly something that will challenge NATO in a way. So how Putin goes about with his strategy with Ukraine, and so I think we're going to see a lot more of this. Of course, they're in a ceasefire right now, but we've had a ceasefire before, so the verdict is still out if I think that ceasefire is going to hold.
China, you speak some
Mandarin,
Chinese.
Yep.
And is it Mandarin you speak?
Mandarin, yes.
And I'm a specialist in Norwegian, by the way. But China, with obviously the tremendous economic growth, the tremendous influence they're having not only in Asia but around the world now, how do you view China's behavior in terms of the Pacific Rim and global affairs? And
well, China certainly wants to be a regional hegemony, right? So, and its assertiveness is clearly seen in the South China Sea and also with Japan, in its territorial areas there. China to me is not really, I'm not really fearful of a China-U.S. conflict sort of thing. But what I am fearful is small tension flares up and other Asian countries getting in some sort of conflict with China. That to me is my more of a main worry with China and its assertiveness.
how do you see, based upon your experience throughout your life, the future of the United States, its role in world affairs? We after the Cold War, we're the only superpower. China's rising to maybe compete with us. How do you feel about our future? Where do you see the future of the United States going in global affairs?
I'm more on the positive side of the United States. I feel United States, a world without the United States is not a world that I would like to see. I always ask people, yes, certainly there's challenges for the United States. Our economy's improving. We have many challenges, as you can see in the foreign policy arena. But United States, I ask people, how would the world look like if the United States wasn't there to promote stability and be engaged in a world? A world not with the United States engaged is, I think, a world that would be a difficult world to live in.
I know in the conversation we had, you view the United States as pivotal in providing some basic order and stability in the world. And say if we weren't able to do what we do, and we've obviously made mistakes and caused problems too, but so we're sort of a key element to provide a ballast in a way in terms of global affairs, a form of stability.
Yes, I think we've in the past century, that's what we've done. And I think also where I think we need to still, again, when you look at the national strategy, is how we balance power. How do we create environments in different parts of the world, an environment where there's more stability.
Well, Nigel, we're going to wrap up this interview and this discussion, and And I thank our audience for listening
Thank
to
you.
the show, and I want to thank you very much for being on the show and joining us today.
Thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Nigel.